If there's two things a lot of people can agree about the 2023 Formula One season, is that it already seems a little boring thanks to Red Bull's domination, but the rise of a one team, Aston Martin, has in fact been a rather surprising success in many, many ways. And now it does seem like they've taken that step to becoming a team who could potentially be challenging even more because, well, it's now been confirmed that they have a new engine deal with Honda from 2026. Impressive stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and then they'll be called the Aston Martin Cognizant Formula One team Aramco Honda, which gives me major Daenerys Stormborn Targaryen first of her name, Queen of the Andals and the first man.
In fact, it also reminds me of the name for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix because it was the Gran Premio del Made in Italy del Grand Prix di Emilia-Romagna, something like that. It was long, and I'm like,
that's what's happening now.
Grand Prix. Yeah, this is again, of course, no one's ever going to call them that. Everyone's just going to call them Aston Martin or Aston Martin-Honda if you're going to use that name. Aramco Cognizant,
Formula One team.
Formula One team. Yeah, I think Aston Martin is good, but Honda, I think that's a genuinely impressive step up considering the engine that has now been dominating for the last 2 years. Make that 3 if you come this season. It's a Honda engine. So what we're going to discuss today is, first off, it's a good deal, we know that much. How good a deal can it be? What is this limit now for this particular team? And can we trust Honda to actually stay around? That last point will be an interesting one because, as history suggests, they don't tend to do that often. But first, let's focus on the main thing. I mean, Aston Martin, until recently, in fact, if you go back to its last guys, Racing Point, then Force India, they were always a team that achieved things on a limited budget. In fact, Team Silverstone has always been that team that kind of, punched above their weight more often than not. Now, though, the billions of Lawrence Stroll have kind of transformed them. They've become a serious competitor, and that efficiency with the combination of a cash infusion suddenly seems to be making them a title-winning team. And a few years back when he said that he wants to do that, people laughed at him.
Yeah.
It does seem to be becoming a reality right now.
I mean, you really have to think how rich is Lawrence Stroll to fund an F1 team.
For his son.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not ignore the elephant in the room here. For his son. I mean, Lance Stroll has the safest seat in the history of F1 ever. Like, ever.
Nothing and no one can move him from there.
Yeah,
unless Lawrence Stroll, of course, decides to buy another team.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, he has the money to do it.
Yeah.
And we've seen, teams or entities own two teams before. It happens even now. You have Red Bull and AlphaTauri. But, I mean, moving our focus back to Aston Martin, a team that, truth be told, always kind of underwhelmed, underachieved, punched above their weight. Now, suddenly, they seem to have all the tools to actually become a title-winning force. Because, again, conventional wisdom in Formula One says you never become a force or a title-winning force if you're a customer team. Till now, and even right now until the end of 2025, they're going to be using Mercedes engines and, of course, even other components which they are allowed to take basis that agreement. Of course, that will present a further challenge, but it's a good challenge for them because, again, if you get it right, you're right up there with F1's elite.
Exactly, and I mean, with the Red Bull and Mercedes domination that we've had, knowing that Red Bull has Honda engines and we've seen what they can do in the past. So, and Aston Martin is not a bad car, okay? That's an excellent car. But then when you compare it to a Red Bull or a Mercedes, of course, but Aston Martin is right up there. I think they're just a few steps behind where Red Bull is right now, where Mercedes was in the past couple years. But I think Aston Martin are really in for a good future.
Yeah, I mean, you've only signed the team that has dominated the title race in the last 2, make that 3 years. That's great. And I mean, it does actually show that, with Aston Martin, they weren't bluffing when they were talking about we want to become a title-winning team. I mean, I've seen a lot of team owners come and go saying the exact same thing. We're going to make this team the new this, the new that. Not many of them managed to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, Red Bull, credit to them, since 2009 times they've been competing for titles. They still seem dedicated to the sport. You've had a Mercedes thereafter, you've had a Ferrari. Now, of course, Aston Martin, new team rising. Honda, that's the thing. And I mean, why I was a little surprised, because it did seem likely that Honda had other options. One was, of course, a return to McLaren, although considering how disastrously that ended the last time around, I don't think that was probably on the cards. But Aston Martin were the only other team that made sense, because again, ideally they would have stayed with Red Bull, but now they want to partner with a team who are upwardly mobile, who they can help make that next level. In that sense, seems the perfect union.
Yes, and there were a lot of people also talking about on social media, on the internet, that since Red Bull already has a Honda engine, wouldn't they be competing with themselves?
I mean, not really.
But then there was an explanation which I don't really remember, but it was something like they're not the same parts or something along the similar lines, where they're not exactly competing each other because they're not in the same compartment.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is that why is it that Red Bull, and this is a very complicated situation when it comes to Red Bull, especially because Red Bull, after the end of 2021, established Red Bull powertrains.
Yes.
Reason being, they wanted to start building their own engines and not be reliant on any other team, which truth be told, they've been throughout, because again, they've had a good chassis department, but never had an engine department. So in their first, dominant title-winning run, they had Renault engines. Then afterwards, you had the Renault engines kind of started giving them problems. I mean, those problems have been well documented even on Drive to Survive. Then they got the Honda deal. And that was a works deal pretty much, because only them and AlphaTauri used it. But they said, no, look, why do we need to be reliant on another customer? Why not just actually start building our engines from scratch? Especially because Honda rather abruptly pulled out. So right now, how the deal is going, and it's very funny, is that Honda are essentially assembling the engines and sending them. And they weren't really being badged as Honda engines until, like in 2022, they were just called Red Bull powertrains engines. Yeah. Despite the fact that they were entirely built by Honda, this year around, they're called Honda RBPTs. And that deal will now run till the end of the 2025 season. Yeah. So, till then, Aston Martin contractually will be using Mercedes engines. So the direct competition doesn't start, and by 2026, Red Bull's team will actually have the capacity to be making their own engines full time. Of course, with a little bit of expertise from Ford. Remember, they had signed that deal with for the new engine. So that's the main reason. And truth be told, it does make sense that Honda would want to stay. The new regulations do, of course, provide you with that advantage if you're a team that are already dominating. And they do have that expertise. They'd, of course, have to change a few things, but I think this is the perfect union for them. Yeah, I think since we were also talking about Aston Martin kind of building its own parts from now on, Mercedes is supplying them the gearbox and the rear suspension. Exactly. So Aston Martin, since from 2026, will have to make their own rear axle, and the gearbox, and of course the suspension. And which is a task, okay, because Whitmarsh came out and talked about how they're already having a lot of issues with the transmission because it's very complicated. Exactly. And with Honda coming in, the main thing that they're looking to, and the main agenda of them partnering with Honda, is to simplify the transmission. Exactly. And he's come out and talked about it in detail as well. And he said, have some quotes? Yeah, we do. He said it's a big challenge, but it's also a necessary challenge to make the step forward. The chassis regulations have not yet been approved, by the way. And I hope that sensible solutions will be found here to simplify the complicated power transmission. And as far as the necessary personnel are concerned, we are already looking for them. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think Aston Martin is one of those teams that are aggressively recruiting from other teams. Remember, they got Dan Fallows from Red Bull, and no coincidence that their car ended up becoming much better. They've gotten people from Mercedes as well. So they're definitely looking to bring in more people. And truth be told, if you're going to have, obviously with Honda supplying the engines, Honda will be having a team of their own. But you'd want to be as self-sufficient as possible. Yes. So in that sense, that is also a challenge. It's not just something that, though it's happened now, great, let's start winning titles. It takes time. And Aston Martin, luckily, they're at a stage where they're already kind of competing. I mean, this year, you can argue that they've had probably the second best car. Yeah. After Red Bull, they've been that one. Remember, Alonso has finished in the podium in every race. That can't be said about either the Ferraris or the Mercedes, both of whom are competing for second place. Or the McLarens. McLarens have kind of replaced Williams at this point. This year. Yeah, it's terrible. It's a terrible car. Daniel Ricciardo will be very happy with what happened because, God forbid, he was already having so many problems last year. I remember him being so frustrated with the team management, with the strategy, with the chassis, and now I think he'll be resting well, thinking that, okay, maybe this happened for the best because I wouldn't have survived another season here. And in fact, mind you, he was struggling in the previous car, which still had some good performances. Yeah. But how bad this car would be that not even Lando Norris can drag a decent performance out of it. Exactly. You can say, okay, Piastri struggles down to, of course, rookie year and everything. Fair. But Lando Norris not being able to drag anything out of that McLaren, that means it's just a bad car. Yeah. Period. Lando's no more a rookie. Yeah. And he's been really good, in fact, in the last 2 seasons. So if he can't get anything out of this car, I'm inclined to believe this is just a really bad car.
You know what I'm looking at?
What?
A possible Daniel Ricciardo move to Aston Martin.
I would love that to happen because, again, I think Aston Martin, by the way, now, I think there are 2 teams in the future who will be very, very appealing to a lot of drivers. One is Aston Martin, the other is, of course, the Sauber Audi team, which will be coming out. Because, again, new manufacturers, you're thinking, okay, new manufacturers, they have money to spend, they want to be competitive. What better team to go? So I think these 2 teams will be teams that a lot of drivers, especially the likes of course, a Danny Rick, but even potentially, let's really, open the Pandora's box. Yeah, what if George Russell or a Carlos Sainz or a Charles Leclerc,
or you never know,
or even a Lando Norris?
Yeah, even Lando Norris, but you never know who might do well in F2, F3.
Exactly, and suddenly they're appealing options.
Yeah.
So I think it opens up, and that's one good thing with the grid being this competitive is that drivers can actually move around without the fear of a step down. Because that is, I think, one of the reasons why a lot of top drivers, they'll tend to stick with their teams. Like you've heard about say even Charles. He's been part with Ferrari and has driven some real dogs of cars, but he knows that the potential is there. So Aston Martin, and I think as you said, or the Sauber Audi, this thing could be teams that could be game changers if things work out. But back to Aston Martin, one thing, everything we've discussed so far, great. One real issue when it comes to that union with Honda, how long is it going to last? And I'm not saying that this is down to Aston Martin, but Honda have the sketchiest record of entering and leaving and entering and leaving and entering and leaving F1. That is, I think, the biggest doubt I have when it comes to this.
I think with Lawrence Stroll, with the kind of money that he has, with the kind of funding that he's been showing, I think it's Honda will stay. Yeah, but since it's their first, partnership with Aston Martin, I don't think they're leaving very soon.
To be fair, interestingly, if you go by history, it's not entirely the first time they've done it with this particular team, although in a different guise. Not Racing Point. Team Silverstone previously was known as the Jordan Racing Team, and Jordan in the 90s actually did have an agreement with Honda for works engines. So they actually do have a little bit of history in that regard. Of course, a lot of people in the team would have changed since then.
Yeah,
because again, this is the 90s we're talking about.
The whole team.
Yeah, actually quite possibly a lot of that team would have changed. But, the thing with Honda is, remember, this is a team that broke Mercedes' dominance and then walked out of the sport. So can you really trust them? That is the big worry I have, because again, with Honda, and I understand why it happens, because the corporate structure in Japan or in their Japan headquarters is kind of complicated. So what happens is the president, if it changes of the company, he might decide that, okay, F1's not a worthy investment, which is what happened, by the way. Then they got a new president just after the pullout, and they started having cold feet. That, okay, we really can't be missing out, especially since it's our engines that are getting them to this glory anyway. That's why they came back.
Yeah.
That's why they came back. So I think if I'm Aston Martin, I have some sort of a clause that is going to be break for at least 3-4 years. Then and only then do I go into this partnership with confidence, because Honda have shown that they can make a good engine. Are they going to stay? That's the real question.
Yeah, but one last point before we wrap up this debate is Fernando Alonso and his history with Honda. I mean,
GP2 engine.
Those are some strong statements that he made. And
he said that in Japan, by the way. In Japan. How bad?
And Whitmarsh had to come out and do a little, cleaning, the sweeping.
How bad? Damage control. Sweeping it under the rug. In fact, that thing, by the way, it went so bad that I remember that around that point, Alonso was trying to also kind of race in Indy as well. So McLaren have an IndyCar team, right? But at that point, McLaren and Honda were racing together, not just in F1, but in IndyCar as well. But because Alonso had annoyed the Honda people so much that he had to take his return to Indy without the Honda engine. It was that bad.
Whitmarsh had to, give some statements because of Alonso, and he said the statements he made in the heat of the moment have of course been remembered. So that's causing a lot of problems. But Fernando is an intelligent person. He knows and respects what Honda has achieved.
I mean, if they can help him win a title again, assuming by the way he's even racing in 26, because again that's, we know he's been having a golden run this year, but he's also well past 40. How many more years does he have? Maybe 1 or 2 years in 2026, 27, if he really wants to do it. And I won't put it past him. But I mean, sometimes after a point, the body also kind of starts giving up on you. But I mean, that's one thing I thought about. I'm like, oh God, Honda engines, Fernando Alonso, that was a dark time when it was McLaren. Hopefully that doesn't happen this time with Aston Martin. So the consensus we've reached, good move, barring on two things. One, how good it goes with when it comes to the time of the contract, because Honda have a history, and of course how well do they get along with the drivers, because again, even assuming it's not an Alonso, Stroll you can pretty much be ensured has a seat for life, but whoever comes in next could also determine the success or failure, because again, it doesn't matter how good the car you have, the drivers you have aren't that great. So consensus, great move, but wait and watch how successful it will be. We hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as we enjoyed talking about it. If you did, you can let us know in the comments, and also don't forget, like, share, subscribe, tap the bell icon, also follow us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and let us know if you enjoy more of these. We'll keep bringing news to you. For now, from Gargi and me, it's bye-bye.